Beneath the burning sands of the Valley of the Kings, behind sealed stone and forgotten corridors, a young king has been lying in silence for more than 3,000 years. His name was Tutankhamun. He ruled Egypt for less than a decade, died before reaching adulthood, and left behind almost no records of his life. And yet, his death has become one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. When his tomb was opened in 1922, the world gasped at the sight of unimaginable gold and treasure. But as archaeologists looked closer, something felt wrong. The burial appeared rushed. Rituals were incomplete. The tomb itself seemed too small for a pharaoh. It was as if Tutankhamun had died suddenly, unexpectedly, and Egypt had been forced to act fast. Who was responsible for preparing this hurried farewell? What secrets were hidden beneath the linen wrappings of his mummy? Was the boy king murdered by those closest to him? Or did illness, accident, or fate claim his life too soon? Modern science has scanned his bones, analyzed his DNA, and challenged long-held assumptions. Yet even today, the final moments of Tutankhamun remain trapped in darkness. This is not just the story of a death. It is the story of power, fear, and silence, and a boy king who took his greatest secret to the grave. In November 1922, beneath the relentless Egyptian sun, a team of exhausted archaeologists stood on the brink of failure. For 5 long years, Howard Carter had searched the Valley of the Kings, convinced that one royal tomb still lay hidden beneath the sand. Sponsors were losing patience. Funds were nearly gone. This season, Carter knew, would be his last chance. Then, on November 4th, a worker's pick struck stone. Carefully clearing away the sand, Carter uncovered a staircase descending into the bedrock. Step by step, the valley revealed a secret untouched for over 3,000 years. At the bottom of the stairs stood a sealed doorway stamped with ancient hieroglyphs. One name appeared again and again: Tutankhamun. When Carter finally peered through a small hole in the door by candlelight, his breath caught. Inside, gold gleamed from every direction. Thrones, chariots, statues, and treasures piled high, as if time itself had stopped. When asked what he could see, Carter famously replied, "Wonderful things." But beyond the splendor, something else lingered in the air: unease. This tomb was different. Unlike other royal burials, it had escaped looters, sealed almost exactly as it had been left. Yet the layout was cramped, the corridors narrow, the burial chamber unusually small for a pharaoh. Objects were stacked haphazardly, some bearing signs they had been repurposed from earlier burials. It did not feel like the resting place of a carefully prepared king. As the world celebrated the greatest archaeological discovery of the century, scholars quietly began to question what they were seeing. Why was Tutankhamun buried in such haste? Why did a king of Egypt receive a tomb that seemed unfinished, improvised, and rushed? The discovery of the tomb answered one question, but it opened many more. And hidden among the gold and glory was the first whisper of a far darker mystery: that Tutankhamun's death had not gone according to plan. At first glance, Tutankhamun's burial appears flawless, an overwhelming display of gold, ritual, and royal splendor. The boy king was laid to rest with more than 5,000 objects, jeweled coffins nested within one another, protective amulets placed carefully across his body, and a golden mask crafted with divine precision. To the untrained eye, this looked like the burial of a pharaoh honored in full.
But Egyptologists soon noticed troubling details. Many burial goods showed signs of haste. Paint had not fully dried. Inscriptions were uneven, sometimes written over older names that had been hastily erased. Some objects clearly did not belong to Tutankhamun at all. They had been repurposed, their original owners' names scratched out and replaced. Even the sacred oils used in the funeral rites appeared rushed, spilling and staining the wrappings of the mummy. The tomb itself raised further suspicion. It was far smaller than those of other kings, consisting of only a few chambers. There were no long corridors, no grand halls carved deep into the rock. Evidence suggested it was not originally intended for a pharaoh, but for a noble or royal official. Why would a king of Egypt be buried in a tomb not meant for him? The positioning of the sarcophagus was also unusual, cramped tightly into the burial chamber, leaving little room to maneuver. Priests had clearly struggled to complete the rituals in such a confined space. This was not the carefully planned farewell Egypt reserved for its divine rulers. In ancient Egypt, death rituals were meticulously prepared years in advance. Pharaohs began planning their tombs early in life. Yet Tutankhamun's burial tells a different story, one of urgency, improvisation, and speed. Something had gone wrong. Whether his death came suddenly, violently, or unexpectedly, the evidence suggests Egypt was unprepared. The perfect burial was an illusion. Beneath the gold and ceremony lay the unmistakable signs of panic and the growing possibility that Tutankhamun's death was not only untimely, but deeply inconvenient for those left behind.
The golden mask of Tutankhamun is one of the most recognizable objects in human history. Crafted from solid gold and inlaid with lapis lazuli, quartz, and obsidian, it presents the image of a serene, godlike ruler, calm, eternal, untouched by suffering. For millions around the world, this face is Tutankhamun. But beneath the mask lies a very different truth. When conservators carefully removed the mask and unwrapped the mummy, the illusion shattered. Tutankhamun was not the flawless young king depicted in gold. His body told a story of weakness, pain, and fragility. CT scans revealed that the boy king was slight in build, with a narrow frame and physical abnormalities that would have made movement difficult. His feet were deformed, one badly so, forcing him to rely on canes simply to walk, canes that were buried with him in great numbers. His skull, long the subject of controversy, showed signs once interpreted as trauma, sparking early murder theories. Later scans challenged those conclusions, suggesting natural features or damage caused after death. Still, the debate lingered. Was this the face of a king struck down by violence, or one slowly worn away by illness? The mask itself raises unsettling questions. Portions of it appear to have been altered. Some inscriptions may not have been intended for Tutankhamun at all, hinting that even this iconic object might have been repurposed in haste. If true, it suggests that Egypt was scrambling, reusing sacred items for a king who died too soon. The contrast is striking. A perfect, immortal face crafted by artisans, and beneath it, a vulnerable young man trapped in a body weakened by genetics and disease. The mask was meant to hide death, to transform a mortal into a god. But today, it does the opposite. It forces us to ask who Tutankhamun really was, and whether the truth of his life and death was deliberately concealed behind gold. Tutankhamun did not inherit a peaceful kingdom. He ascended the throne during one of the most turbulent periods in Egypt's history, a time of political upheaval, religious revolution, and fragile alliances.
The nation was still reeling from the radical reforms of his father, or possibly his brother, Akhenaten, who had attempted to replace centuries of traditional Egyptian polytheism with the worship of a single god, Aten, the sun disk. Temples had been abandoned, priests displaced, and centuries-old traditions upended. The boy king's advisors, especially the powerful vizier Ai and General Horemheb, were acutely aware that Egypt's stability depended on reversing these changes. Tutankhamun, barely a child, was thrust into a role he could scarcely comprehend. His every decree was likely guided by those who held the real power behind the throne. Political factions vied for influence, and the young pharaoh became a symbol of legitimacy and continuity in a nation desperate for stability. The turmoil extended beyond politics. Relations with neighboring kingdoms were tense, trade routes were vulnerable, and Egypt's economy had suffered under the previous religious upheaval. The young king's court was a delicate balancing act of appeasing powerful priests, military leaders, and foreign envoys. Any misstep could provoke rebellion or weaken the fragile state. In this environment, Tutankhamun's death was more than a personal tragedy. It was a national crisis. A sudden death could create a power vacuum, spark conspiracies, or ignite conflict among ambitious officials. Some historians suggest that the rushed burial and oddities in the tomb may have been a reflection of this fragile political landscape. Even as we marvel at the treasures found in his tomb, the chaos surrounding Tutankhamun's reign reminds us that the boy king ruled in a world of instability, fear, and intrigue, a world that may have shaped the mysterious circumstances of his untimely death. Tutankhamun's story begins long before he became a king. Born around 1341 BCE, he entered a world of immense privilege but also hidden peril. His lineage was royal, yet tangled with the complexities of dynastic politics. Genetic studies suggest that his parents were closely related, likely siblings or half-siblings, a practice common in Egyptian royalty intended to preserve the divine bloodline. While this ensured the continuity of royal power, it also carried hidden risks, including congenital disorders that may have plagued the boy king throughout his life. From birth, Tutankhamun was surrounded by the grandeur of the Egyptian court. Palaces lined with painted walls and gleaming columns were his earliest playgrounds. Priests chanted incantations over him, ensuring divine protection, while tutors and officials monitored every step of his development. Every meal, every gesture, every choice of clothing reinforced his identity as a living god on earth, a symbol of the pharaoh's eternal power. Yet his early life was marked by fragility. Skeletal evidence reveals physical deformities, clubfoot, scoliosis, and possibly a cleft palate that would make walking and performing typical royal duties difficult. He relied on crutches and specialized chairs, yet he was expected to embody strength, courage, and divine authority. Amid this delicate existence, Egypt itself was in the midst of religious upheaval, as the radical reforms of Akhenaten were being contested by traditionalist factions. From his very first days, Tutankhamun's life was entwined with politics, religion, and the heavy expectations of a kingdom that looked to him as both a living god and the last hope for stability. Even as a newborn, the boy destined to rule Egypt was born into a web of privilege, fragility, and political intrigue, a life that would end too soon, leaving questions about his death that still haunt historians today. Tutankhamun ascended the throne at roughly 9 years old, a child in a world designed for powerful adults. He became pharaoh not through choice, but by birthright, a divine heir expected to embody the will of the gods.
Egypt's throne was not a place for play or innocence. It was a position of immense responsibility, with every decision bearing consequences for millions of subjects, for the kingdom's stability, and for the delicate balance of power among the court's elite. As a boy king, Tutankhamun could not govern alone. He relied heavily on advisors, most notably a seasoned statesman, and Horemheb, a military general. These men wielded authority behind the scenes, guiding the young pharaoh through political and religious reforms. Some historians argue that Tutankhamun was little more than a figurehead, a symbol of continuity in a kingdom still recovering from the upheavals of Akhenaten's religious revolution. Yet even as a child, he was expected to appear divine, strong, and commanding, a living god whose image reassured the people that order persisted. Daily life for Tutankhamun was a blend of ceremony, instruction, and constant observation. Every gesture, from the way he sat on the throne to how he addressed officials, was scrutinized and performed according to strict royal protocol. Despite his youth, he participated in religious rituals, military reviews, and diplomatic ceremonies, representing Egypt to his people and foreign emissaries. The pressures on the boy king were immense. Scholars suggest that this constant stress, combined with his physical fragility, may have contributed to his untimely death. Tutankhamun's short reign illustrates the paradox of power. A child on the throne could be both revered and vulnerable, a divine symbol, yet a mortal boy. His life was a fragile balancing act between authority, expectation, and survival, a precarious position that history would tragically cut short. Though Tutankhamun wore the golden crown of Egypt, the true power of the kingdom often lay elsewhere, behind the throne, in the hands of those who guided, manipulated, and sometimes exploited the young pharaoh. The vizier, was a master politician whose influence over the boy king was unmatched. He had served previous rulers and understood the delicate balance of loyalty, fear, and ambition required to maintain control. Every decree Tutankhamun issued, every ceremonial act he performed, was likely advised or at times dictated by men like Alongside stood Horemheb, a formidable general who commanded the army and enforced the authority of the pharaoh. Horemheb's role was to protect the kingdom from external threats and internal unrest, but he also played a decisive part in shaping the young king's reign. Egypt's stability depended on the combined strategies of the court's advisors, and the boy king's every move was subtly steered to ensure the continuation of policies favorable to those in power. These powerful figures were not merely caretakers, they were guardians of the state, manipulators of ritual, and, some argue, opportunists who could seize the throne if circumstances allowed. In a palace where whispers could mean life or death, Tutankhamun's authority was as much symbolic as it was real. He represented continuity, legitimacy, and divine favor, yet the actual governance rested with seasoned adults who understood the fragile politics of Egypt. The boy king's reliance on these men highlights the paradox of his reign. He was the visible ruler of the greatest civilization of his time, yet behind the crown, the reins of power were firmly held by those with experience, ambition, and sometimes self-interest. Tutankhamun's life and decisions were inseparable from the shadows of men who ensured the kingdom survived, and whose own actions may have influenced the mysterious circumstances of his untimely death. When Tutankhamun ascended the throne, Egypt was still in upheaval from the religious revolution of Akhenaten, the boy king's predecessor and possible father. Akhenaten had attempted to dismantle centuries of polytheistic tradition, replacing it with the worship of a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. Temples were abandoned, priests displaced, and the rituals that bound Egyptian society together had been disrupted. The country was fractured, its spiritual and political foundations shaken. Tutankhamun's reign marked a dramatic reversal. Under the guidance of advisors like Ai and Horemheb, the young pharaoh reinstated the old gods, restoring the temples of Amun, Osiris, and Ra to prominence. Statues and shrines were rebuilt, and priests returned to their former positions, once again commanding respect and authority. Religious festivals resumed, and the iconography of the gods reappeared in tombs, temples, and official decrees. The young king's name was linked with the divine order, symbolizing the restoration of balance, known to the Egyptians as Ma'at. This return to tradition was not only a spiritual necessity, but also a political strategy. By aligning himself with the old gods, Tutankhamun legitimized his rule and reassured a population unsettled by years of radical reforms. The boy king became a symbol of continuity, a bridge between the chaos of Akhenaten's revolution and the stability of the past. Yet for a ruler so young, these religious restorations were likely guided by those in power behind the scenes. Tutankhamun's personal beliefs remain unknown, but his reign became defined by the revival of the old gods, an attempt to heal a fractured nation. In many ways, the boy king's life, and perhaps even the circumstances of his death, was entwined with this effort to restore not just faith, but order itself, making him both a religious figurehead and a pawn in the intricate game of Egyptian politics.
Tutankhamun was a king in every sense of title, yet his body told a different story, a story of fragility, weakness, and vulnerability. Skeletal examinations reveal that he suffered from a variety of physical ailments, likely stemming from generations of royal inbreeding. His spine was slightly curved, his knees and legs malformed, and one foot severely deformed. These conditions would have made walking painful and unstable, explaining the collection of more than 130 canes found in his tomb, some ornately decorated, others plain, tools essential for a young king forced to navigate palace halls and ceremonial events. Beyond physical disability, Tutankhamun's health was compromised by illness. Recent DNA studies reveal he suffered from malaria, a disease common in ancient Egypt but often deadly when combined with other weaknesses. Some researchers also suggest he may have had bone necrosis or a severe leg infection, possibly aggravated by trauma or poor healing. Together, these factors paint the picture of a boy king struggling with his own mortality, even as he carried the weight of divine kingship on his shoulders. His fragility extended beyond the physical. Tutankhamun's youth made him dependent on advisors, whose guidance was both necessary and potentially dangerous. In a kingdom where power was absolute but precarious, his weakness may have invited intrigue, manipulation, and even suspicion. Every ritual, every decision, and every procession required careful management to conceal his vulnerabilities while presenting the image of a god-king to his people. The paradox of Tutankhamun's reign is striking. He ruled over one of the most powerful civilizations in the ancient world, yet his body and health were fragile, imperiled by genetics, disease, and circumstance. This fragility, combined with the political turbulence of his time, may hold clues to understanding the mysterious and untimely death of Egypt's most famous boy king. Among the most striking discoveries in Tutankhamun's tomb was an unusually large collection of walking canes, over 130 in total, each carefully arranged near the king's burial site. These canes, carved from wood and sometimes inlaid with gold or ivory, are more than ceremonial objects.
They are a silent testament to the physical challenges the boy king faced in life. Skeletal evidence reveals that Tutankhamun's feet were deformed, with one foot particularly malformed, likely preventing him from walking unassisted. The canes may have served both as support and as symbols of status, allowing him to maintain the appearance of divine authority despite physical limitations. The deformities were likely congenital, a consequence of generations of royal inbreeding designed to preserve the divine bloodline. Such conditions may have caused chronic pain, imbalance, and difficulty standing or moving long distances. Yet the young pharaoh was expected to participate fully in ceremonial duties, military displays, and religious rituals. Images of him standing tall on temple reliefs or striding beside advisors hide the reality that each step may have been an effortful struggle. Interestingly, some of the canes were elaborately decorated, suggesting that even in physical weakness, Tutankhamun's image needed to reflect power and prestige. Others were simpler, functional, perhaps reflecting the day-to-day reality of navigating the palace or tomb. Together, they provide a poignant glimpse into the life of a boy king trapped between expectation and limitation, strength and vulnerability. These artifacts force us to reconsider the narratives of Tutankhamun as a strong and commanding ruler. Instead, they reveal a fragile young man whose body betrayed him long before death arrived, a man who relied on tools, strategy, and human support to fulfill the impossible demands of kingship in ancient Egypt. In these silent canes, the boy king's hidden struggle becomes painfully clear.
Tutankhamun's lineage was marked by a practice common among Egyptian royalty: close kin marriages. Pharaohs often married siblings or half-siblings to preserve the divine bloodline, maintaining the belief that kings were living gods whose power was inherited. While this tradition strengthened dynastic legitimacy, it carried hidden risks, risks that may have contributed to Tutankhamun's frailty and ultimately his untimely death. Modern genetic studies on the boy king's remains reveal startling truths. DNA analysis suggests that both of his parents were likely siblings, making Tutankhamun the product of intense inbreeding. This genetic closeness increased the likelihood of congenital disorders, many of which were evident in his skeletal remains. His narrow frame, spinal curvature, malformed knees, and clubfoot all point to developmental issues that would have hindered mobility and caused chronic discomfort. Even minor injuries could have become life-threatening due to compromised physical resilience. In addition to skeletal deformities, the genetic legacy of inbreeding may have left Tutankhamun vulnerable to disease. Studies indicate that he contracted malaria, which, when combined with his physical weaknesses, could have severely weakened his immune system. The combination of hereditary conditions and infectious disease created a precarious balance between life and death, making the young king's survival tenuous from the start. These findings shed light on why Tutankhamun relied on canes, specialized chairs, and constant assistance, yet still had to perform the public and religious duties expected of a pharaoh. The pressures of kingship, coupled with a body compromised by genetics, illustrate a life lived on the edge of fragility. In understanding the consequences of royal inbreeding, we gain a clearer picture of the boy king's vulnerabilities, the challenges he faced, and the possible reasons behind the mysterious circumstances of his early death. Tutankhamun was a living symbol of divine lineage and a tragic example of the hidden costs of preserving it.
Malaria, a disease still feared in many parts of the world today, was also a deadly presence in ancient Egypt. For Tutankhamun, evidence suggests that it may have been a silent killer lurking in the shadows of his fragile body. Modern DNA analysis of his remains revealed traces of Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite responsible for the most severe form of malaria.
In a boy already weakened by congenital deformities and chronic illness, even a single infection could have been fatal. Malaria would have been widespread in the Nile Valley, carried by the abundant Anopheles mosquitoes thriving along the river's banks. The disease likely caused high fevers, fatigue, and severe anemia, making it difficult for anyone to function, let alone a king required to participate in ceremonial duties, military inspections, and religious rituals. The impact on Tutankhamun's small and vulnerable body could have been devastating, exacerbating existing injuries and infections. Interestingly, malaria may also help explain some of the mysteries surrounding his burial. If the boy king suffered recurrent bouts of the disease, his death may have come suddenly during a particularly severe episode. The hurried arrangements in his tomb, the apparent repurposing of ritual objects, and the unusual positioning of his sarcophagus may reflect a kingdom forced to respond quickly to an unexpected death. Malaria was not merely a background detail, it was a potential factor in the boy king's decline. Combined with skeletal deformities, possible leg injuries, and a compromised immune system, the disease paints a picture of a life under constant strain. Tutankhamun was not just a fragile ruler because of his youth. He was biologically vulnerable to forces invisible to the naked eye, forces that may have played a decisive role in the untimely and mysterious end of Egypt's most famous pharaoh.
Tutankhamun's life was marked not only by political pressure and the weight of kingship, but also by chronic physical suffering. Skeletal analysis reveals multiple sources of pain and potential infection that may have plagued the young pharaoh throughout his short life. His left leg shows signs of a severe fracture that may not have fully healed, and his deformed foot would have made even simple movements difficult. Walking, standing for ceremonies, or riding a chariot, rituals expected of a pharaoh, could have caused significant discomfort. But injuries alone do not tell the full story. Studies suggest that Tutankhamun may have suffered from repeated infections, a dangerous combination when coupled with a body weakened by congenital disorders. Open wounds, bone deformities, or untreated fractures in an era without modern medicine could easily become septic. Evidence of bone necrosis and joint damage hints at recurring inflammation or infection, possibly worsening over time. Such conditions could have caused fever, swelling, and pain, limiting his mobility and making the simple act of daily life an arduous task. Despite these challenges, the boy king was expected to appear strong, confident, and divine. Public appearances and rituals required him to mask his suffering, to perform with the poise of a god king. Artifacts such as canes, specialized thrones, and supportive chairs indicate the lengths taken to accommodate his physical weakness while maintaining appearances. This combination of pain, infection, and weakness offers critical insight into Tutankhamun's vulnerability. His fragile body, constantly under strain, may have made him susceptible to sudden decline. It also suggests that his death was not simply a result of one event, but a culmination of physical hardships that, in a time without medicine, could easily become fatal, turning a boy king's life of privilege into a tragic story of suffering and premature death. The question of Tutankhamun's death has haunted historians and scientists for nearly a century. Some evidence suggests that the boy king may not have died suddenly, but rather experienced a prolonged decline. His skeletal remains tell a story of cumulative physical stress, congenital deformities, a deformed foot, spinal curvature, and joint problems that would have caused chronic pain and limited mobility. Coupled with repeated infections and bouts of malaria, it is plausible that Tutankhamun endured years of weakening illness. Medical analyses show that his immune system may have been compromised, leaving him vulnerable to complications from even minor injuries. The fracture in his left leg
combined with evidence of bone necrosis, points to a lingering problem that may have never fully healed. This slow deterioration could explain the numerous canes buried with him, tools that allowed him to continue participating in the ceremonial and ritual obligations of kingship, despite severe limitations. A slowly dying king would also have had political implications. Advisors like Ai and Horemheb would have been acutely aware of the pharaoh's fragility, carefully managing his appearances and decisions to maintain the illusion of strength. Even daily life would have been a delicate balancing act, ensuring that Tutankhamun could meet ceremonial expectations while minimizing physical strain. Some scholars propose that a prolonged illness may also account for the hurried burial preparations. If the king's health had been deteriorating over months or years, the final moments of his life could have caught the court off guard, necessitating improvised tomb arrangements and the repurposing of burial items. In this scenario, Tutankhamun's death was less a sudden tragedy and more a drawn-out decline, a boy king trapped in a weakening body, bearing the immense weight of divine expectation while slowly succumbing to the hidden vulnerabilities that history has only recently begun to uncover. One of the most debated pieces of evidence in the mystery of Tutankhamun's death is the severe fracture of his left leg, discovered during modern examinations of his mummy. The injury, located just above the knee, is complex, with bones broken into multiple fragments. For decades, scholars speculated about how this fracture occurred and whether it played a decisive role in the boy king's untimely death. Some theories suggest the break was caused by a violent accident, chariot crash, a fall from a horse, or even foul play. Ancient Egyptian artwork depicts pharaohs riding chariots in battle or hunting, activities that were both prestigious and dangerous. A high-speed collision or fall could easily have shattered the young king's leg. Others argue that the injury may have occurred post-mortem during mummification or excavation, though CT scans and forensic analysis lean toward trauma inflicted near the time of death. The broken leg itself would have been catastrophic in an era without modern medicine. Without proper treatment, a broken femur can lead to massive blood loss, infection, and immobility. In Tutankhamun's already weakened state, compromised by genetic deformities, malaria, and possible chronic infections, this injury could have accelerated his decline or directly contributed to his death. The position of the fracture and its severity suggest he would have experienced extreme pain and limited mobility in the final days of his life. The urgency seen in the burial arrangements may reflect the court's reaction to a sudden, incapacitating injury. Ultimately, the broken leg serves as a tangible clue in the enigma of Tutankhamun's death. Whether caused by accident, foul play, or a combination of factors, it highlights the fragility of the boy king and the precarious balance between life, power, and mortality in ancient Egypt. This single injury may have tipped that balance, leaving a young pharaoh to die far too soon. Tutankhamun's sudden and mysterious death has fueled one of the most enduring debates in Egyptology. Was it the result of an accident or a deliberate attack? The evidence is ambiguous, leaving historians and scientists to piece together possibilities from skeletal remains, tomb arrangements, and historical context. On one hand, the boy king may have suffered a tragic accident. CT scans and forensic studies suggest several injuries consistent with high-impact trauma, including a shattered left femur and possible head trauma. Chariot riding was a favored activity of young pharaohs, combining ceremony, sport, and martial training. A misstep during a fast ride or a collision could explain his broken leg, while falls or collisions might account for other unexplained injuries. The combination of physical fragility, disease, and a hazardous environment could have made even a minor accident fatal. On the other hand, some scholars have posited foul play. Tutankhamun's rise to the throne occurred in a politically unstable period, with advisors such as I and Horemheb holding substantial power behind the scenes. A sudden death would have benefited ambitious officials seeking to consolidate authority. Early interpretations of skull fractures and unusual injuries fueled theories of assassination, possibly through a blow or violent encounter. Some researchers even speculated about poisoning, though evidence remains inconclusive. The ambiguity of the tomb adds to the mystery. The rushed burial, hasty arrangements, and repurposed funerary items may reflect a death that shocked the court, whether caused by an accident or intentional harm. Ultimately, the truth may lie somewhere between accident and attack. Tutankhamun's fragile health, combined with dangerous activities and a court rife with intrigue, creates a scenario in which both possibilities are plausible. The boy king's death remains an enigma, a delicate balance between human error and human ambition, leaving the world to wonder whether fate or foul play claimed Egypt's most famous pharaoh. Among the most perplexing discoveries in Tutankhamun's mummy are the unusual anomalies of his chest and rib cage. When modern CT scans examined his remains, researchers found evidence suggesting damage to the rib area, along with the curious observation that one rib appeared to be missing or displaced. This discovery has fueled theories about trauma, infection, or even surgical intervention, adding another layer of mystery to the young pharaoh's death. Some scholars speculate that the rib and chest damage could indicate a violent incident. A blow to the chest, perhaps during an accident or attack, might have caused fractures or dislocations. In combination with the other skeletal injuries, such as the broken left femur, this has led some to argue that Tutankhamun may have suffered a catastrophic event shortly before his death. Others caution that the damage could have been caused post-mortem, either during mummification or over centuries of decay and handling, leaving the true cause ambiguous. Another possibility is that the anomalies resulted from disease. Malaria, infection, or congenital weaknesses could have led to bone degeneration or deformities in the chest and rib area. Combined with his fragile physical condition and genetic disorders, these factors might have weakened his thoracic structure, making minor trauma far more dangerous than it would have been for a healthy individual. The missing rib and chest damage also complicate earlier murder theories. While some have suggested assassination or deliberate violence, modern forensic studies emphasize that the evidence is inconclusive, highlighting the limits of interpreting ancient remains. Regardless of the cause, the rib and chest anomalies underscore the precariousness of Tutankhamun's life. They remind us that the boy king's death was likely influenced by a combination of fragility, injury, and disease, a complex web that continues to challenge historians and scientists seeking to uncover the truth behind Egypt's most famous pharaoh. One of the most hotly contested pieces of evidence in the mystery of Tutankhamun's death is the condition of his skull. Early X-rays taken in the 1960s suggested a significant fracture at the back of the cranium, prompting sensational theories that the boy king had been struck violently, perhaps murdered by someone seeking to seize power. For decades, this idea captured the public imagination, the image of a young pharaoh felled by treachery before he could reach adulthood. However, later examinations and modern CT scans complicated this narrative. Researchers found that the fracture might not have been the result of an ancient blow at all. Some argue it was caused by the mummification process, in which embalmers used tools and chemicals that could have inadvertently damaged the fragile skull. Others suggest it may have occurred during the excavation in 1922, when the mummy was handled under imperfect conditions, or as a result of centuries of natural deterioration. The debate extends further because the skull shows evidence of deformation that may have been congenital. Tutankhamun's family history of inbreeding produced various skeletal anomalies, and some irregularities in the skull could be attributed to genetic conditions rather than trauma. This challenges the earlier narrative of violent death and opens the possibility that Tutankhamun's demise was more likely related to illness, infection, or accidental injury. Yet the mystery endures. Even with high-resolution imaging, the skull continues to yield ambiguous clues. Did the boy king die from a sudden blow, or was the damage a misleading artifact of time and handling? The skull debate highlights the broader challenge of reconstructing ancient lives from fragile remains. In Tutankhamun's case, every crack and anomaly invites speculation, but few answers, leaving the boy king's final moments shrouded in uncertainty. Over the decades, the story of Tutankhamun's death has evolved dramatically as new technologies and forensic techniques have allowed scientists to re-examine his remains. Early interpretations, relying on X-rays and limited analysis, fueled dramatic claims of murder, violent injury, or even palace intrigue. Yet modern research has painted a more nuanced picture, challenging long-held assumptions and highlighting the complexity of the boy king's fragile life. CT scans, DNA analysis, and advanced imaging reveal a combination of factors that likely contributed to his early death. Genetic testing confirms he suffered from congenital disorders, possibly caused by generations of royal inbreeding, which left him physically fragile and vulnerable to illness. Skeletal examinations show a deformed foot, spinal curvature, and a fractured left femur, suggesting both chronic conditions and acute trauma. Additionally, traces of malaria DNA point to repeated infections that would have severely weakened him, particularly in a time without effective medical care. These findings have prompted scholars to reconsider earlier murder theories. What was once interpreted as skull trauma or suspicious rib damage may now be explained by congenital deformities, post-mortem changes, or handling during excavation and mummification. While violent injury cannot be entirely ruled out, the evidence increasingly supports a scenario in which illness, combined with physical weakness and possible accidental injury, played a central role in his death. Re-examining Tutankhamun's remains also sheds light on the hasty burial and unusual tomb arrangements. If the boy king's health had been deteriorating, or if he died suddenly from an infection or accident, the court may have had little time to complete traditional funerary rituals. Modern science, therefore, not only illuminates the mysteries of his body, but also helps contextualize the decisions made after his death, offering a clearer, though still incomplete, understanding of Egypt's most famous pharaoh.
The powerful vizier and later pharaoh, looms large in discussions of Tutankhamun's mysterious death. A seasoned courtier who had served multiple pharaohs, I was well versed in the politics, rituals, and power dynamics of Egypt. He was not just an advisor, he was a kingmaker, a man whose influence extended to every corner of the royal court. Historians often describe him as ambitious, cunning, and pragmatic, qualities that would make him both an invaluable ally and a potential threat to a young ruler. During Tutankhamun's reign, I's presence was pervasive. The boy king, barely able to walk without assistance, relied on I to navigate complex religious restorations,
political negotiations, and military matters. The vizier's advice shaped key decisions, including the return of the old gods, the consolidation of the military, and the management of internal unrest. While these actions stabilized Egypt, they also placed Ai in a position of unprecedented influence, effectively controlling the kingdom while Tutankhamun remained a figurehead. Ai's power, however, has fueled speculation about his possible role in the boy king's untimely death. Some theorists argue that Ai may have had motives to accelerate Tutankhamun's demise, clearing the path for his own ascent to the throne. The sudden death of the pharaoh, combined with the rapid and unusual arrangements of his burial, seems to benefit those closest to the court, particularly Ai. While no definitive evidence links Ai to foul play, his presence in the court at the time of Tutankhamun's death cannot be ignored. He embodies the intersection of ambition, authority, and opportunity, a man capable of shaping Egypt from the shadows. The story of Tutankhamun's death is inseparable from the enigmatic figure of Ai, whose ambitions cast a long and shadowy influence over the boy king's final days. Horemheb, a formidable military general, was one of the most influential figures in Tutankhamun's court, often described as the general-in-waiting. While the boy king held the title of pharaoh, Horemheb commanded the army and oversaw the security of the kingdom. His experience, discipline, and strategic mind made him a central figure in maintaining Egypt's stability, particularly during a period marked by political fragility and lingering unrest from the religious upheaval of Akhenaten's reign. Horemheb's influence extended beyond the battlefield. As a trusted advisor, he played a critical role in guiding Tutankhamun's decisions, from religious reforms to military campaigns. In many ways, Horemheb ensured that the young king's rule projected authority and continuity, even as Tutankhamun's fragile health and youth limited his personal capacity to govern. Contemporary historians suggest that Horemheb was both protector and observer, wielding power subtly while allowing the pharaoh to remain the symbolic figurehead of divine kingship. The general's position has also made him a figure of speculation in theories surrounding Tutankhamun's death. Horemheb eventually succeeded Ai as pharaoh, which some interpret as a potential motive in a court rife with intrigue. While there is no concrete evidence linking him to foul play, the sudden death of a child king during a period of political uncertainty inevitably draws attention to those in positions of influence, especially a man of Horemheb's ambition and capability. Horemheb's life after Tutankhamun's death reinforces his political acumen. He undertook major reforms, restored the stability of the Egyptian state, and erased traces of rivals from official records, demonstrating the calculated precision of his rule. In examining Tutankhamun's final days, Horemheb emerges as a guardian, a strategist, and an ever-present figure in the delicate interplay of power, a general waiting for his moment, shaping the boy king's reign from the shadows. The court of Tutankhamun was a labyrinth of ambition, intrigue, and hidden agendas. Though the boy king wore the crown of Egypt, real power often resided with those around him, advisors, generals, and priests who maneuvered through the palace corridors with careful calculation. In such an environment, the line between loyalty and self-interest was thin, and every gesture, every whisper could carry profound consequences. Some historians have suggested that Tutankhamun's untimely death may have been influenced or even orchestrated by palace insiders. Ai, the vizier, and Horemheb, the general, held considerable sway over both the administration and the military. Others at court, including ambitious priests and royal officials, may have viewed the boy king's fragile health as an opportunity to secure their own positions. In a society where the pharaoh's authority was absolute, the sudden absence of a ruler created both risk and potential reward, making the stakes extraordinarily high. The unusual burial arrangements in Tutankhamun's tomb provide a subtle but compelling clue. Items hastily repurposed, a tomb clearly too small for a pharaoh, and the apparent rush to complete funeral rituals suggest that the court was responding to an unexpected event, or perhaps acting to conceal something. Could this have been the result of a conspiracy, a quiet orchestration by those who stood to gain the most from his death? While no definitive evidence has confirmed foul play, the very structure of the court lends itself to speculation. Tutankhamun's youth, physical frailty, and illness made him vulnerable, not just to disease and accident, but also to manipulation and intrigue. The palace, with its corridors of power and hidden agendas, may have been as dangerous as any battlefield, a place where even a king could fall before his time. In the shadows of these grand halls, the possibility of a palace conspiracy continues to captivate historians and to haunt the legacy of Egypt's most famous boy king.
Among the many theories surrounding Tutankhamun's death, the idea of deliberate poisoning or foul play has fascinated scholars and the public alike. The boy king died suddenly, his young body already weakened by genetic disorders, disease, and physical injuries. This combination of factors left the door open for speculation. Could someone at court have hastened his demise to seize power or protect their own interests? Proponents of the murder theory often point to the rapidity of Tutankhamun's death and the unusual arrangements in his tomb. The hurried burial, repurposed funerary items, and the cramped sarcophagus could indicate a palace in crisis, responding quickly to an unexpected death or concealing evidence of foul play. Some historians have suggested that the fracture in his leg, the anomalies in his skull, and traces of chest trauma could be signs of violent assault. Others speculate about poison, administered quietly to avoid detection, a method not unknown in ancient courts where intrigue was common and ambition ran high. The vizier who succeeded him, and Horemheb, the powerful general, have often been highlighted in these theories. Both stood to gain from the boy king's death, and both exercised considerable influence over the court. While there is no direct evidence linking them to murder, the combination of opportunity, motive, and Tutankhamun's vulnerability fuels the speculation. Modern forensic analysis, including DNA studies and CT scans, has challenged the idea of murder, suggesting that disease, infection, or accidental injury may better explain his demise. Yet the question of a palace plot or subtle poisoning lingers, tantalizing historians and enthusiasts alike. The boy king's death remains a blend of mystery, biology, and human intrigue, an enigma that continues to provoke debate over 3,000 years later. Tutankhamun's story is not just one of illness and fragility, it is also a tale of ambition, suspicion, and the dangerous allure of power. The death of Tutankhamun is as much a story of what is unknown as it is of what we can uncover. Despite the treasures, inscriptions, and careful preservation of his tomb, the truth of his final moments remains frustratingly elusive. History itself seems to have conspired to keep his death a mystery, leaving only fragments of evidence and a void where certainty should be. Ancient records offer almost no direct explanation. Unlike some pharaohs whose reigns were chronicled in stone and papyrus, Tutankhamun left behind very little written testimony of his life or death. Official histories were often edited by successors. Horemheb, for instance, removed references to rivals and predecessors
in efforts to legitimize his own rule. In doing so, much of the context surrounding the boy king's demise may have been erased. What remains are glimpses, tomb arrangements, skeletal anomalies, and hastily written inscriptions that hint at urgency, illness, or intrigue, but never tell the full story. Modern science has filled in some gaps, revealing the boy king's genetic vulnerabilities, possible disease, and injuries. Yet even with CT scans, DNA analysis, and forensic methods, scholars cannot definitively answer whether he died from accident, illness, or foul play. Each piece of evidence opens new questions. Was the broken leg fatal? Did malaria weaken him beyond recovery? Could political intrigue have played a role? The silence of history surrounding Tutankhamun's death has become part of his enduring legend. It reminds us that even in one of the most well-documented civilizations of the ancient world, some mysteries resist explanation. For historians and enthusiasts alike, the boy king's untimely death is not simply a forensic puzzle. It is a story shaped by absence, ambiguity, and the haunting certainty that some secrets travel unbroken through time, resting forever with the golden mask in his tomb.
One of the most compelling theories about Tutankhamun's death is the idea that a chariot accident may have caused his untimely demise. Chariot riding was both a prestigious activity and a symbol of pharaonic power in ancient Egypt. Young kings like Tutankhamun were expected to demonstrate skill, courage, and strength during training, ceremonial processions, and even mock battles. However, for a boy already physically fragile, these high-speed excursions could have been dangerous, even fatal. Evidence supporting this hypothesis comes from the severe fractures found in Tutankhamun's left femur and other skeletal anomalies. The nature of the leg injury suggests high-impact trauma, consistent with being thrown or crushed during a chariot accident. Combined with his malformed foot, spinal curvature, and limited mobility, it is plausible that a simple fall or collision at speed could have led to catastrophic injury. Such an accident may also explain the hasty burial arrangements, the unusual positioning of his sarcophagus, and the hurried repurposing of funerary items in his tomb, reflecting a court forced to respond quickly to an unexpected death. The chariot crash theory also aligns with historical context. Ancient Egyptian tomb art depicts pharaohs engaged in chariotry, often emphasizing skill and divine protection. For Tutankhamun, physical deformities would have made him especially vulnerable, turning a demonstration of royal prowess into a perilous ordeal. While alternative theories suggest murder, poisoning, or disease, the chariot hypothesis offers a plausible combination of accident and circumstance. It accounts for both the physical trauma observed in his remains and the rapid funeral preparations. If true, the boy king's death may have been the tragic result of youthful ambition, royal expectation, and fragile health, an accident that claimed one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs before his time, leaving a legacy shrouded in gold and enduring mystery. Tutankhamun's final days remain a puzzle, partly because his body presents conflicting clues, and partly because the timeline of events surrounding his death is fragmented. CT scans, X-rays, and DNA studies reveal a young king weakened by congenital disorders, malaria, and physical trauma, most notably a severe fracture to his left femur. Yet determining the exact sequence of these events is nearly impossible. Did the leg break weeks before death, slowly incapacitating him? Or did it occur during a sudden accident that immediately led to his demise? The fractured femur, combined with congenital deformities such as a malformed foot, narrow frame, and spinal irregularities, suggests that even routine activities would have been painful and exhausting. Scholars believe he required canes, supportive chairs, and careful guidance from attendants
just to participate in daily royal duties. If the fracture happened during his final hours, it could have turned a manageable weakness into a fatal vulnerability, especially when combined with malaria or infection. Adding to the uncertainty is the hasty burial. Tutankhamun's tomb shows signs of hurried arrangements. The sarcophagus was cramped, items were repurposed, and funeral rituals appear incomplete. This may indicate that his death occurred suddenly, leaving the court scrambling to prepare a proper royal burial. Yet the timeline of events, his injury, bouts of illness, and final decline remains unclear, making it difficult to reconstruct the final chapter of his life with certainty. The broken body and broken timeline of Tutankhamun underscore the complexity of his death. A fragile boy king, already compromised by genetics and disease, may have faced a cascade of physical crises, culminating in a sudden or rapid decline. The ambiguity leaves historians and scientists with a haunting question. Did the sequence of misfortunes alone claim Tutankhamun, or was something more sinister hidden within the fractured timeline of his final days?
In ancient Egypt, even minor injuries could become life-threatening. For Tutankhamun, whose body was already weakened by congenital deformities, malaria, and chronic ailments, infections posed a deadly risk. Without antibiotics or modern medical care, a simple wound could escalate into a fatal condition, particularly in a young pharaoh whose immune system may have been compromised. Skeletal evidence suggests that Tutankhamun suffered from fractures, including a severe break in his left femur. In an era without sterile techniques, such injuries were prone to infection. Bone infections, or osteomyelitis, could cause extreme pain, fever, and swelling, and could weaken the body's capacity to fight even minor illnesses. Coupled with malaria, a common and often deadly disease in the Nile Valley, the risk of complications was significant.
a single infected wound or untreated fracture might have been enough to precipitate a rapid decline. The artifacts buried with him offer further insight into his vulnerability. Dozens of canes, specialized chairs, and supportive thrones indicate that the boy king required assistance to move safely, suggesting that even minor accidents could result in injury. If a fall or chariot mishap occurred near the end of his life, the chances of infection would have been high, especially if open wounds were left untreated. Infection without medicine highlights the precariousness of life in Tutankhamun's time. Unlike modern societies, where medical interventions can prevent death from bacterial infections, ancient Egyptians relied on herbal remedies, ritual purification, and limited surgical practices. For a fragile boy king, these measures may have been insufficient. Ultimately, infection could have been a silent killer, striking without warning and compounding existing vulnerabilities. In the absence of medical care, Tutankhamun's weakened body faced dangers that no wealth, power, or divine status could fully protect against, making illness a likely factor in the enigma of his untimely death. Tutankhamun's death may not have been the result of deliberate violence or palace intrigue, but rather a tragic convergence of misfortune, fragility, and circumstance, a death without intent. Evidence suggests that his body was compromised from birth. Congenital deformities, a malformed foot, spinal irregularities, and a narrow frame limited his mobility and made him prone to injury. In addition, repeated bouts of malaria and possible infections weakened his immune system, leaving him vulnerable to complications from even minor trauma. The broken left femur, one of the most discussed injuries, could have been accidental rather than deliberate. Chariot riding, hunting expeditions, or even simple missteps within the palace might have caused a catastrophic fracture. In a modern context, such an injury would be treatable, but in ancient Egypt, without antiseptics or surgical interventions, a broken bone could easily lead to infection, sepsis, and death. The young king's fragile health would have amplified the danger, turning what might have been a survivable accident for others into a fatal event. The rapid preparations in his tomb suggest the court responded to an urgent death rather than a long-planned conspiracy. Hasty burial arrangements, repurposed funerary items, and a cramped sarcophagus indicate that officials had little time to adhere to traditional protocols. While this has fueled speculation about foul play, it may simply reflect the realities of a sudden death in a young, physically compromised ruler. Tutankhamun's demise, then, can be seen as the tragic intersection of a vulnerable body, dangerous activities, and a lack of medical care. Death without intent does not diminish the drama of his story. It underscores the fragility of life in ancient Egypt, even for a pharaoh. The boy king's passing was likely an accident of circumstance, a reminder that mortality spares no one, not even those wrapped in gold and celebrated as living gods. One of the most striking mysteries surrounding Tutankhamun's death is the unusual nature of his tomb. Unlike the grand, sprawling tombs of pharaohs before and after him, Tutankhamun's burial chamber was relatively small and hastily prepared, leading many scholars to wonder whether it was intended for a king at all. The modest scale, combined with the chaotic arrangement of artifacts, suggests that those responsible were forced to improvise, perhaps because the boy king's death came unexpectedly. Archaeologists note that the sarcophagus was cramped, leaving little space for the body or accompanying treasures. Precious funerary items were hastily placed, with some objects seemingly repurposed or borrowed from other tombs. The elaborate gold mask and ceremonial treasures could not fully mask the sense of urgency, The burial lacked the careful planning and architectural grandeur typical of a fully prepared royal tomb. This has fueled speculation that Tutankhamun's death was sudden, and the court had to act quickly to ensure he received a proper royal burial, despite the incomplete preparations. The tomb's size and arrangement also highlight the fragility of Egypt's political and ritual systems. A king's burial was not only a matter of personal honor, but also a religious necessity, maintaining the cosmic order and securing the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. The improvisation in Tutankhamun's tomb reflects the tension between ritual obligation and the practical reality of a ruler dying unexpectedly. Ultimately, the small, hurried tomb adds to the enigma of Tutankhamun's life and death. It suggests that his passing was unplanned, a disruption to both palace and priesthood. The boy king, celebrated for his wealth and status in life, was buried in a space that could barely contain him, a poignant symbol of a life and reign cut tragically short, leaving history to puzzle over the circumstances surrounding his untimely death. One of the most fascinating aspects of Tutankhamun's tomb is the sheer number of burial goods that appear to have been improvised. While the boy king's burial included extraordinary treasures, golden masks, jewelry, and ceremonial items, archaeologists have noted a striking level of repurposing and adaptation that suggests his death was sudden and unplanned. Objects intended for other purposes or previous tombs were hastily reallocated to ensure the pharaoh received an appropriate royal burial. For example, some of the ceremonial furniture, chariots, and decorative items show signs of last-minute adjustments. Certain canopic jars and ritual vessels were mismatched or modified to fit the limited space, indicating that the embalmers and tomb preparers were under pressure to complete the interment quickly. Even some of the iconic golden artifacts, such as jewelry and amulets, appear to have been selected for practicality and symbolism rather than careful ceremonial planning. The hurried nature of the arrangement contrasts sharply with the meticulous planning seen in other royal tombs, emphasizing the urgency imposed by the boy king's sudden death. This improvisation also sheds light on the court's response. Advisors, priests, and attendants likely faced immense stress, balancing the religious requirement to preserve Tutankhamun's afterlife with the practical challenge of completing a tomb in a limited time frame. The quick adaptations underscore the fragility of the boy king's reign. His death disrupted carefully maintained rituals and traditions, forcing those responsible to act creatively under pressure. The improvised burial goods serve as a silent testament to the chaos that followed Tutankhamun's death. They reveal the tension between ceremonial expectation and reality, providing a window into the uncertainty and urgency of the moment. Even among gold and splendor, hints of haste remind us that the boy king's final journey to the afterlife was shadowed by the suddenness of his demise.
One of the most unusual aspects of Tutankhamun's tomb is its architectural irregularity. Unlike the precise, symmetrical tombs of other pharaohs, his burial chamber contains crooked walls, uneven passageways, and oddly placed niches that suggest hasty construction. Archaeologists believe this lack of planning may reflect the suddenness of his death, leaving the court with little time to prepare a tomb befitting a king. The corridors twist at unusual angles, and some chambers appear cramped, as if space had been repurposed from earlier or unfinished constructions. Even the burial chamber itself is smaller than expected, forcing the sarcophagus, furniture, and treasures into tight quarters. Items intended for ritual precision were hastily adjusted to fit the confined space, highlighting the improvisation involved. These crooked walls are more than a structural anomaly. They are a physical record of urgency, reflecting a palace scrambling to honor a pharaoh who died before plans could be properly executed. Poor planning is also evident in the placement of burial goods. Some ceremonial items were stacked in ways that suggest expediency rather than ritual order, and essential funerary objects were relocated or borrowed from other tombs. The chaotic arrangement contrasts sharply with the meticulous design of tombs belonging to other rulers, where symmetry and ceremonial alignment symbolized cosmic order and the pharaoh's divine journey to the afterlife. The irregular architecture of Tutankhamun's tomb serves as a silent testimony to the fragility of his reign. The crooked walls, cramped spaces, and improvised adjustments reveal a court forced to react to the sudden death of a young king, balancing religious obligation with practical necessity. In this physical imperfection, the story of Tutankhamun's final days is etched in stone, a boy king's life and death captured in hurried bricks, corridors, and walls that could barely contain him. One of the enduring mysteries surrounding Tutankhamun's death is the apparent rush to bury him. The hasty arrangements in his tomb, the cramped sarcophagus, and the repurposed burial goods all suggest that the court was under intense pressure to complete the funeral quickly. But why the rush? Several theories attempt to explain the unusual urgency, each shedding light on the precarious circumstances of the boy king's final days. The most plausible explanation is that Tutankhamun's death was sudden. His fragile health, marked by congenital deformities, malaria, and chronic injuries, may have deteriorated rapidly, leaving the palace little time to prepare a proper royal tomb. In ancient Egypt, the proper burial of a pharaoh was not merely a ceremonial formality, it was a sacred duty. The proper rituals ensured the pharaoh's safe journey to the afterlife and maintained cosmic balance, or ma'at, for the living. Any delay could have been considered dangerous both spiritually and politically, compelling advisors to act immediately. Another possibility involved political considerations. Tutankhamun was a boy king surrounded by powerful figures such as Ai and Horemheb, each with ambitions and influence over the court. A sudden death could create uncertainty and opportunity, pressuring the administration to finalize the burial swiftly, to assert control and prevent unrest. The urgency might reflect both practical necessity and political strategy, ensuring the pharaoh was interred according to tradition while securing the succession and legitimacy of those in power. Finally, environmental and logistical factors may have contributed. Tomb construction was already underway, and the sudden need to accommodate a king may have forced modifications, leading to the cramped spaces and improvised placement to burial items. The rush, then, is a clue to the chaotic circumstances of Tutankhamun's death, a young, fragile pharaoh, a court in tension, and a sacred duty demanding immediate action. It underscores how quickly life and death could disrupt even the most powerful institutions of ancient Egypt. The funeral of Tutankhamun was unlike that of any other pharaoh, shrouded in haste, secrecy, and the eerie sense of shadows cast over a boy king's final journey. Unlike the grand, meticulously planned royal funerals of Egypt, Tutankhamun's burial appears rushed, improvised, and marked by anomalies that suggest a sudden and unexpected death. The sarcophagus was cramped, tomb corridors were narrow and irregular, and many ceremonial items were hastily arranged or repurposed. This was a funeral conducted in the shadows of urgency rather than the light of traditional splendor. Priests, officials, and attendants would have worked tirelessly under pressure to complete the necessary rites, performing complex rituals designed to secure the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife. Every moment was critical. In ancient Egyptian belief, delays could imperil the journey of the soul,
and disrupt the balance of Maat, the cosmic order. Yet the hurried placement of treasures and sacred objects suggests that some rituals were shortened, adapted, or perhaps even omitted entirely, leaving a sense of incompleteness. The shadows in this funeral were not only literal, but symbolic. Tutankhamun was a boy king whose reign was brief, whose body was fragile, and whose death may have shocked the court. Advisors like and generals such as Horemheb had to navigate not only religious obligations, but also the political vacuum left by the sudden loss of a ruler. The secrecy and rapidity of the burial may reflect attempts to protect the tomb, assert continuity, and prevent unrest during a delicate transition of power. In this shadowed funeral, gold and splendor coexist with haste and uncertainty. The boy king, celebrated in life and revered in death, was interred under circumstances that reveal as much about the fragility of his reign and body as they do about the grandeur of his civilization. It was a final passage marked by mystery, urgency, and the quiet weight of history bearing down on a young, fallen pharaoh. Modern science has given historians and Egyptologists a revolutionary tool to examine Tutankhamun's mysterious death: DNA analysis. In the early 21st century, researchers extracted genetic material from the boy king's mummy to uncover clues about his ancestry, health, and vulnerabilities. DNA testing has revealed startling details, painting a portrait of a young ruler whose life was shaped as much by genetics as by politics or circumstance. The tests confirmed that Tutankhamun was the child of siblings, likely children of Pharaoh Akhenaten. This intense inbreeding, intended to preserve the divine royal bloodline, carried hidden consequences. Genetic disorders became more likely, and Tutankhamun's skeletal anomalies, such as a malformed foot, spinal irregularities, and narrow limbs, can now be linked directly to inherited conditions. These congenital weaknesses help explain why he relied on more than 130 walking canes and required constant assistance in daily life. DNA analysis also detected traces of malaria parasites in Tutankhamun's remains, providing evidence that repeated infections weakened his body over time. Combined with injuries like a fractured femur and possible chest trauma, the boy king's genetic vulnerabilities left him alarmingly susceptible to both disease and accident. Scientists now have a more complete understanding of why his young body may have been unable to survive even minor trauma or infection, circumstances that might have been fatal for him but manageable for a healthier individual. Beyond health, DNA testing clarified Tutankhamun's family tree, confirming relationships among the royal line and offering insight into the broader consequences of intermarriage among Egypt's pharaohs. These findings do more than answer medical questions. They shed light on the precariousness of royal life, where politics, religion, and heredity intersected. In the end, DNA testing transformed our understanding of Tutankhamun, revealing that his death was likely the result of biology as much as circumstance. A boy king's fragile body, burdened by both heritage and misfortune, succumbing to the hazards of ancient life. The advent of CT scanning has revolutionized the study of Tutankhamun's death, offering unprecedented insight into the boy king's fragile body. In the early 2000s, high-resolution scans allowed researchers to examine his skeletal remains in detail without disturbing the mummy itself. These scans revealed a combination of injuries, congenital deformities, and disease markers that have reshaped our understanding of how the young pharaoh may have died. CT scans confirmed the presence of a severe fracture in Tutankhamun's left femur, suggesting high-impact trauma that could have been accidental. The scans also highlighted abnormalities in his spine, narrow shoulders, and a clubfoot, features consistent with congenital disorders likely caused by generations of royal inbreeding. These physical limitations would have made him reliant on canes, supportive chairs, and constant assistance, even for basic mobility. Additionally, the scans detected subtle signs of possible chest trauma and injuries to the skull, though forensic experts debate whether these occurred before or after death. Traces of malaria parasites were also identified in his tissues, confirming that disease played a role in weakening his body. The combination of trauma, infection, and congenital weakness paints a picture of a young pharaoh living under constant physical stress, vulnerable to accidents or rapid health decline. CT imaging also helped clarify earlier speculations about murder. While some injuries might suggest violence, the scans indicate that many could have been accidental or post-mortem in nature. The boy king's death appears increasingly likely to be the result of a convergence of misfortune, fragile health, repeated illness, and accidental injury, rather than deliberate foul play. By revealing the hidden details of Tutankhamun's body, CT scans provide a clearer, more scientific perspective on his untimely death, transforming centuries of rumor and speculation into a nuanced understanding of the vulnerabilities of Egypt's most famous pharaoh. The mystery of Tutankhamun's death has captivated historians for nearly a century, but modern science is forcing scholars to rewrite long-held assumptions. Early theories, ranging from violent assassination to palace intrigue, were based on limited examinations, sensationalized observations, and speculation. The discovery of his tomb in 1922 fueled dramatic stories of murder, curses, and betrayal, leaving the world to imagine a boy king felled by treachery. However, advancements in forensic science, DNA analysis, and CT scanning have provided a more nuanced understanding of his death, challenging these dramatic narratives. Analysis of Tutankhamun's DNA revealed a fragile constitution inherited from a history of sibling marriages within the royal family. Congenital deformities, including a malformed foot, spinal irregularities, and narrow limbs, made him physically vulnerable from birth. CT scans and forensic studies further identified severe injuries, such as a fractured left femur, along with signs of malaria and possible infections. These findings suggest that the boy king's body was ill-equipped to survive even minor accidents or bouts of illness. The previously popular notion of murder is now largely questioned. Many of the injuries once interpreted as evidence of foul play can be explained by accidents, disease, or post-mortem damage during mummification. Likewise, the unusual arrangements of tomb artifacts, once cited as proof of conspiracy, are increasingly seen as the result of haste following an unexpected death. Rewriting these assumptions allows historians to focus on the realities of Tutankhamun's life, a boy king burdened by fragile health, living under the pressures of court, ritual, and expectation. His untimely death may have been less a product of intrigue and more a tragic convergence of biology, circumstance, and misfortune, a conclusion that humanizes the pharaoh and shifts the narrative from scandal to the fragility of life in ancient Egypt. One of the most compelling theories about Tutankhamun's death involves the deadly combination of malaria and physical injury. Modern DNA studies have revealed that the boy king's body carried traces of Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite responsible for the most severe form of malaria. This discovery provides crucial context for understanding his vulnerability. Repeated bouts of high fever and weakened immunity would have left him fragile and susceptible to other health complications. Compounding this, CT scans and skeletal examinations
show that Tutankhamun suffered from a severe fracture to his left femur, likely sustained in a sudden accident. Whether from a chariot crash, a fall, or another traumatic event, the injury would have been catastrophic for a body already compromised by disease. In an era without antiseptics or surgical treatment, a broken leg could easily become infected, leading to sepsis, fever, and a rapid decline. The interaction of malaria and trauma paints a scenario in which Tutankhamun's death may have been an unfortunate convergence of circumstances rather than foul play. His weakened immune system would have struggled to cope with infection, while the physical injury restricted mobility and exacerbated his pain. The presence of multiple canes and supportive devices in his tomb further illustrates the extent of his physical limitations, suggesting that even minor accidents could have had serious consequences. This combination also helps explain the hasty burial and improvised arrangements in the tomb. Officials likely recognized the suddenness of his decline and acted quickly to perform the essential rituals while securing the pharaoh's safe journey to the afterlife. Malaria plus injury, therefore, provides a plausible explanation for Tutankhamun's untimely death, highlighting how biology and circumstance intersected to end the life of Egypt's most famous boy king, leaving a legacy shrouded in both wealth and mystery. The story of Tutankhamun's death has long been entangled in a mix of sensationalism and speculation. From the moment Howard Carter uncovered the boy king's tomb in 1922, the world was captivated by tales of murder, curses, and palace intrigue. Newspapers and popular books amplified rumors of assassination and violent betrayal, transforming Tutankhamun into a figure of mystery and fear. Yet for decades, much of this narrative rested on incomplete evidence, conjecture, and dramatic interpretation rather than scientific fact. Modern science has begun to disentangle fact from fiction. High-resolution CT scans, DNA analysis, and advanced forensic techniques allow researchers to examine the pharaoh's remains with unprecedented precision. These studies have revealed that Tutankhamun was physically fragile due to congenital disorders from royal inbreeding, weakened further by repeated bouts of malaria and chronic illness. His skeletal injuries, including a fractured left femur, can be explained by accident rather than foul play. Even anomalies in the skull and rib cage may have resulted from post-mortem handling or mummification processes rather than violence. By contrast, early sensationalist theories often interpreted these same features as evidence of assassination or a palace conspiracy. Headlines proclaimed murder and treachery, while the public fascination with the curse of the pharaoh further fueled dramatic speculation. Yet science now offers a more measured understanding. Tutankhamun likely died from a combination of illness, genetic vulnerability, and accidental injury, rather than deliberate human action. This shift highlights the tension between myth and evidence. While storytelling and legend continue to captivate audiences, scientific investigation provides clarity, revealing the boy king not as a victim of intrigue, but as a young ruler whose fragile body and unfortunate circumstances led to an untimely death. Science triumphs over sensationalism, illuminating the reality behind one of history's most famous mysteries. After Tutankhamun's sudden death, the political landscape of Egypt shifted rapidly, and the vizier Ai seized the opportunity to ascend the throne. Ai had long been a powerful figure in the royal court, serving as an advisor, diplomat, and high-ranking official under Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. His experience and proximity to the young king placed him in a position to consolidate power quickly when the boy pharaoh died unexpectedly. Ai's rise was remarkable, both politically and historically. Unlike hereditary succession,
which might have favored other royal family members or generals, such as Horemheb. I's assumption of kingship suggests he maneuvered strategically within the court, securing the support of priests and officials. By crowning himself pharaoh, he stabilized a kingdom that could have been thrown into turmoil by the death of its youthful ruler. The smoothness of this transition also reflects I's careful orchestration, as he maintained continuity in governance, religious rituals, and the administration of the state. Yet I's ascent has also fueled speculation. Some historians argue that his swift takeover raises questions about possible involvement in Tutankhamun's death, though no direct evidence confirms foul play. The speed of the transition and the proximity of his advisors to the boy king make for a tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive narrative. Regardless of the controversy, I's reign demonstrates the fragile nature of royal succession in ancient Egypt. A sudden death could transform advisors into rulers overnight, and a boy king's demise could elevate a powerful vizier to ultimate authority. I's crowning underscores the intersection of opportunity, ambition, and circumstance in the Egyptian court, marking the end of Tutankhamun's short reign and the beginning of a calculated and politically astute period under a ruler who had waited in the shadows for his moment. Despite being one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs today, Tutankhamun was nearly erased from history shortly after his death. Following the boy king's untimely demise, the political landscape shifted dramatically, and his memory was quietly marginalized. Successive rulers, particularly Horemheb, sought to restore order and legitimacy after a tumultuous period marked by Akhenaten's religious upheavals and Tutankhamun's brief reign. In doing so, they removed references to Tutankhamun and other royal figures associated with the Amarna period from official records and monuments. Inscriptions, reliefs, and even tomb decorations that celebrated Tutankhamun were defaced, replaced, or simply destroyed. His name was omitted from king lists, and the memory of his reign faded from public consciousness. The boy king, whose rule lasted barely a decade, became a ghost in the annals of Egyptian history. To the outside world, the pharaoh who restored the traditional gods and attempted to stabilize Egypt seemed to vanish, leaving only whispers of his existence in archaeological records. This erasure highlights both the power and fragility of memory in ancient Egypt. Pharaohs were considered divine, and their legitimacy rested not only on political authority, but also on enduring remembrance. By removing Tutankhamun from official narratives, successors like Horemheb were able to consolidate their own power, rewrite history, and present a continuous, stable lineage to their subjects. Ironically, this attempt to erase him only increased modern fascination. When Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the boy king's story emerged from the shadows, preserved in gold, artifacts, and the physical remains of a life cut tragically short. Today, Tutankhamun's near erasure serves as a testament to both the impermanence of power and the enduring curiosity of history, reminding the world that even kings who vanish from memory can leave an unforgettable legacy.
For nearly 3 millennia, Tutankhamun was largely forgotten, his name lost to time, and his reign overshadowed by more prominent pharaohs. Following his untimely death at around 18 years old, the boy king's memory was intentionally minimized by his successors. Horemheb, who assumed power after sought to restore stability to Egypt following the religious upheavals of Akhenaten's reign. In doing so, he systematically removed references to Tutankhamun and other Amarna rulers from official records, monuments, and temple inscriptions. Tutankhamun's erasure was complete in many ways. His name was omitted from king lists,
and depictions of him were defaced or replaced. Temples he restored and rituals he oversaw were credited to other pharaohs. To the citizens of Egypt, the boy king who attempted to revive the old gods and maintain order effectively vanished from history. His tomb, hastily constructed and relatively small, reflected not only the urgency of his burial, but also the brevity and fragility of his reign. In life and death, Tutankhamun's presence was eclipsed by more dominant rulers. Yet, paradoxically, it is precisely this near erasure that contributed to his modern fame. When Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, it had remained hidden for centuries, untouched by grave robbers and insulated from historical revision. The treasures, the golden mask, and the wealth of artifacts provided an unprecedented glimpse into a pharaoh's life, reign, and death. Being forgotten for 3,000 years transformed Tutankhamun from a minor historical figure into a global symbol of ancient Egypt. His story, once erased our political necessity, was resurrected by archaeology, reminding us how history can be rewritten, lost, and rediscovered. The boy king, silent for millennia, returned to captivate the world, proving that even those forgotten can leave an indelible mark on human memory. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter and his team captivated the world, not just for the treasures inside, but for the stories that soon followed. Stories of a curse that would strike anyone who disturbed the boy king's rest. The curse of the Pharaoh became one of the most enduring legends in archaeology, blending fear, superstition, and the mystery surrounding Tutankhamun's untimely death. The tale began with the sudden deaths of several individuals associated with the excavation, including Lord Carnarvon, the tomb's financial backer, who died of blood poisoning shortly after the tomb was opened. Newspapers sensationalized the story, suggesting that Tutankhamun himself had exacted revenge from beyond the grave. Headlines warned of a vengeful spirit, a divine force unleashed against those who dared disturb the sanctity of the pharaoh's final resting place. Public imagination ran wild, connecting each unfortunate event to the mystical power of the young king. Modern analysis offers a more rational perspective. Many of the deaths were coincidental or caused by natural factors. Exposure to ancient dust, mold, and bacteria in the tomb could have triggered respiratory infections or other illnesses, while the prevalence of diseases such as influenza in the 1920s contributed to the fatalities. Yet the power of the curse lies not in scientific explanation, but in its cultural impact. It amplified fascination with Tutankhamun, transforming him from a historical figure into a symbol of ancient Egypt's mystical allure. The curse of the pharaoh continues to captivate audiences today. It reflects the human tendency to mythologize the unknown, especially when intertwined with wealth, death, and mystery. While the boy king may not have reached from the grave to punish those who entered his tomb, the legend of Tutankhamun's curse has immortalized him in global imagination, ensuring that his story extends far beyond the walls of his tomb. Tutankhamun's fame, paradoxically, rests not on the achievements of his reign, but on the circumstances of his death and the discovery of his tomb thousands of years later. A boy king who ruled for less than a decade, his political accomplishments were modest. He restored the traditional gods after Akhenaten's religious reforms and stabilized a fragile kingdom. Yet it was his untimely death, shrouded in mystery, that set the stage for his enduring global legacy. The suddenness of Tutankhamun's demise, combined with the unusual features of his burial, created a story ripe for intrigue. The hastily arranged tomb,
cramped sarcophagus and improvised burial goods suggested urgency, sparking centuries of speculation about accident, illness, or foul play. Modern forensic science, CT scans, DNA testing, and analysis of his injuries has clarified much of the mystery, revealing a boy king weakened by congenital deformities, malaria, and fractures. Yet the fascination with possible conspiracies and palace intrigue persists, fueling the public imagination and making Tutankhamun a figure of timeless curiosity. His posthumous fame skyrocketed with Howard Carter's discovery of the tomb in 1922. The tomb's treasures, golden masks, elaborate jewelry, and ceremonial items captured worldwide attention. Unlike other pharaohs, whose names and deeds were recorded in stone but remained obscure to modern audiences, Tutankhamun's treasures were intact, tangible, and visually stunning. The juxtaposition of immense wealth with a young life cut tragically short amplified the drama, creating an icon of both mortality and majesty. Tutankhamun's story illustrates how death can transform historical significance. While his reign was brief, the mysteries surrounding his demise and the treasures that accompanied him into the afterlife have made him the most famous Egyptian pharaoh in modern culture. His fame through death is a testament to the power of narrative, archaeology, and human fascination with the fragile line between life and legacy. For decades, the sudden death of Tutankhamun sparked one of the most persistent questions in Egyptology. Was it murder? Early theories suggested palace intrigue, foul play, and conspiracies among those closest to the boy king. His fragile health, combined with the rapid rise of and Horemheb after his death, fueled speculation that the young pharaoh had been eliminated to clear the path for ambitious officials. Supporters of the murder theory point to several unusual factors: the fracture in his left femur, possible trauma to the skull, and hasty burial arrangements suggest a sudden, violent end. Additionally, Tutankhamun's reliance on advisors and the lack of a clear adult heir created a power vacuum in the court. In such an environment, a well-timed act of violence could have secured the throne for a cunning courtier or general. The speed with which ascended to the throne and the apparent erasure of the boy king from certain records only deepened suspicion. However, modern forensic studies challenge the notion of murder. CT scans, DNA analysis, and careful examinations of the mummy indicate that many injuries could have been accidental or occurred post-mortem. Malaria, combined with congenital deformities and possible infections, may have been sufficient to cause death. Even the fractured femur could have been a result of a chariot accident or fall rather than deliberate assault. Ultimately, the question of murder remains unresolved. While intrigue and ambition undoubtedly existed in Tutankhamun's court, scientific evidence leans toward a tragic convergence of disease, fragility, and accident, rather than deliberate assassination. Yet the theory persists in popular culture, reflecting the enduring human fascination with mystery, ambition, and the untimely death of a boy king whose short life continues to captivate the world. Another prominent theory about Tutankhamun's untimely death focuses on disease rather than foul play. Advances in modern science, including DNA testing and CT scanning, have revealed that the boy king's body bore evidence of multiple health issues that may have contributed to his early demise. Among the most significant findings is the presence of malaria parasites, specifically Plasmodium falciparum, which causes the deadliest form of the disease. Repeated bouts of malaria could have weakened Tutankhamun's immune system, leaving him vulnerable to infections and complications from even minor injuries. In addition to malaria, genetic analysis has revealed that Tutankhamun suffered from congenital disorders,
likely a consequence of inbreeding within the royal family. These conditions manifested as a malformed foot, narrow limbs, spinal irregularities, and other skeletal anomalies that would have limited his mobility and resilience. For a young pharaoh expected to perform ceremonial duties, ride chariots, and participate in state affairs, these physical weaknesses created constant risk. Even a minor accident could have triggered severe complications. CT scans also indicate that Tutankhamun suffered from a severe fracture in his left femur, which may have become infected, and possibly other injuries that contributed to his declining health. In an era without antibiotics, surgery, or modern medical care, infections and fevers could be fatal. The combination of a weakened immune system, malaria, and untreated injuries presents a plausible scenario in which disease alone, or alongside accidental trauma, could explain his death. The disease theory underscores the vulnerability of ancient royalty, showing that wealth and divine status could not always protect a young pharaoh from biological realities. Tutankhamun's death may have been tragic not because of intrigue or murder, but because of the intersection of illness, frailty, and circumstance, a fragile body succumbing to the harsh realities of life in ancient Egypt. Among the many theories surrounding Tutankhamun's untimely death, accident remains one of the most compelling explanations. The boy king was physically fragile, suffering from congenital deformities such as a clubfoot, narrow limbs, and spinal irregularities, which made mobility difficult and increased the likelihood of injury. Add to this the demands of his role, riding chariots, participating in ceremonial hunts, and navigating the complex terrain of palace and desert, and the possibility of an accidental death becomes increasingly plausible. Evidence from CT scans and forensic examinations suggests this hypothesis. The severe fracture to Tutankhamun's left femur, coupled with other skeletal injuries, suggests trauma consistent with a high-impact accident rather than deliberate violence. A chariot crash, a fall during a hunt, or even a misstep on palace stairs could have caused catastrophic damage to a body already weakened by genetic disorders and chronic illness. In ancient Egypt, such accidents could easily prove fatal due to the lack of advanced medical treatment and the high risk of infection. The hurried arrangements in his tomb further hint at an unexpected death. The cramped sarcophagus, repurposed burial goods, and irregular tomb layout suggest that officials had to act quickly to perform the necessary funerary rites, leaving little time for the careful planning typical of a royal burial. Such improvisation aligns with the notion that Tutankhamun's death was sudden and unplanned. Considering his frailty, the high-risk activities required of a pharaoh, and the hasty burial preparations, an accidental death provides a logical and scientifically supported explanation. While speculation about murder or poisoning has captivated imaginations for decades, accident, compounded by pre-existing health issues, remains one of the most plausible reasons why the boy king, celebrated in life and enshrined in gold, met such an early and tragic end.
Tutankhamun's death remains one of history's most enduring mysteries, and despite centuries of speculation and modern scientific inquiry, the complete truth may forever elude us. Over the years, theories have ranged from murder and poisoning to disease, accident, and even the supernatural. Each hypothesis is supported by fragments of evidence, yet none can fully account for all the anomalies surrounding the boy king's life and untimely death. The forensic studies conducted on his remains reveal a fragile body, compromised by congenital disorders, malaria, and skeletal injuries. CT scans and DNA testing provide detailed insights into his health, but they cannot conclusively determine the exact sequence of events leading to his death. The fracture in his femur, the malformations in his limbs,
and the hastily arranged burial goods offer clues, yet each could be interpreted in multiple ways. Was the fracture caused by an accident, a chariot crash, or something more sinister? Did malaria alone weaken his body to the point of collapse, or did infection from injuries play the decisive role? Political context adds further uncertainty. Advisors like I and generals such as Horemheb had motives, opportunities, and influence, prompting endless speculation about palace intrigue. Yet historical records are incomplete, intentionally altered or destroyed, leaving only shadows of potential conspiracies. Ultimately, Tutankhamun's death illustrates the limits of human knowledge. While modern science can illuminate aspects of his physical condition and suggest plausible scenarios, it cannot reconstruct the precise moment when fate intervened. Perhaps that uncertainty is part of what makes the story so compelling. A boy king, buried in gold, whose life ended too soon, leaving the world to ponder questions that time and the sands of Egypt have carefully obscured. The truth of Tutankhamun's death may forever remain a mystery, locked within the tomb of a pharaoh we can admire but never fully understand. Tutankhamun's story is one of mystery, tragedy, and enduring fascination. A boy king who ruled for less than a decade, his life was cut short under circumstances that remain uncertain even today. Was it disease, accident, or intrigue? Modern science has provided clues. CT scans, DNA analysis, and forensic studies reveal a fragile body weakened by congenital disorders, malaria, and injuries. But the exact cause of his untimely death continues to elude historians. The hurried burial, cramped sarcophagus, and improvised placement of treasures in his tomb speak to the suddenness of his passing. Political shifts after his death, including the ascension of Ai and later Horemheb, further clouded the narrative, leaving the boy king almost erased from historical memory. Yet, centuries later, Tutankhamun emerged from the shadows, his tomb discovered intact in 1922 by Howard Carter, revealing treasures that captured the world's imagination. The fascination with Tutankhamun is not just about gold or opulence. It is about the enigma of a young life abruptly ended, a ruler whose death has sparked speculation for nearly a century. His story reminds us of the fragility of life, even for those celebrated as divine, and the limits of what we can ever truly know about the past. As we reflect on the boy king's eternal silence, we are reminded that some mysteries remain unsolved, and some stories continue to captivate across generations. Tutankhamun may have left no answers, but his life and the questions it raises live on, immortalized in gold and memory. If you enjoyed this exploration of Tutankhamun's life and mysterious death, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so more people can uncover the secrets of history alongside us.